Will the collapse of neoliberalism bring to America and Russia? And, you know, there is a reckoning coming, and we're seeing it in both these countries. The kind of oligarchy that neoliberalism always produces has made both the United States and Russia so unstable that it won't hold. Those of you who remember, you know, my rants back when I published a year ago, when I published the book, The Hidden History of Oligarchy, American oligarchy, in fact, I pointed out that oligarchy, which is basically rule by the rich, which is what we have here in the United States and have had for about 30 years, as the consequence of the Supreme Court saying that it's legal to bribe politicians. And so large industries and billionaires have you know, they fully own the Republican Party, and they own about, you know, half to a third of the Democratic Party. And so no meaningful legislation that actually helps average people, no, you know, kind of socialist legislation, you know, like Medicare for all or free college, has been able to pass. In fact, even reasonable environmental regulations haven't passed. Even Build Back Better, well, not the son of Build Back Better, let's say, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and the Inflation Reduction Act. They both, you know, at the insistence of Joe Manchin, had neoliberal provisions built into them that every penny that is spent with these bills has to be run through the hands of a for-profit corporation. So here we have this neoliberal experiment in America that has reduced our middle class from 65% of us when Reagan came into office to 45% of us today. That has moved 60,000 factories from the United States overseas, most to China and Vietnam, and led to the layoff of over 10 million Americans who had good-paying manufacturing jobs. So we're seeing this happening in the United States, which paved the way for Donald Trump to come along saying, hey, I hate neoliberalism. He didn't use those words, but he said, I'm going to raise taxes on the rich. My friends are going to hate me. I'm going to support the labor unions, you know, which were lies. I'm going to strengthen environmental protections. I mean, he literally campaigned against neoliberalism, and then he governed as just another neoliberal Republican, which is why he wasn't reelected, in my opinion. So what is neoliberalism and what does it do? Neoliberalism is both an economic and political system that was hatched in the 1940s, principally by von Mises, von Hayek, and Milton Friedman. And it basically causes the regulation of the economy of a nation to be taken away from government and handed over to the largest, wealthiest, and most powerful economic actors, whether it's billionaires, corporations, or both. And it accomplishes this through five basic methods. Number one, it diminishes government's role in protecting people, communities, and small business. That's called deregulation. Number two, it guts the power of labor, destroying unions, letting corporations go anywhere in the world to find the cheapest labor available, aka free trade. It allows virtually unlimited acquisition of wealth by the top 1% as a result of massive tax cuts. We now have two American men who own more wealth than the bottom half of America. And they're using their money to shoot themselves into outer space and stuff. It privatizes the essential functions of government, handing them off to private corporations. For example, fully half of Medicare is now privatized with George W. Bush's Medicare Advantage scam. And half of the electric systems in America have been privatized, and we are suffering as a result of it. And it promotes the formation of monopolies and oligopolies by refusing to enforce antitrust and other anti-predation laws, as Reagan, you know, started in 1983. So neoliberalism has been tried in a big way in 4 countries so far, and I document this in my new book, The Hidden History of Neoliberalism. Chile, that was the Pinochet experiment. Iraq, this was the L. Paul Bremer, Paul Wolfowitz, well, really Bush-Cheney, Rumsfeld experiment. Russia, that was the IMF. The IMF said, you know, I mean, when Gorbachev unwound the Soviet Union, he wanted Russia to become a progressive, democratic socialist country like Sweden. He literally identified Sweden as the role model for Russia. This was Gorbachev's idea. And he said it out loud over and over again. And then he and Yeltsin came to the IMF and said, you know, we're going to need $1 trillion in loans, or a couple $100 billion in loans to make this transition from communism to a free market economy and a social safety net. And the IMF said, we will only give you those loans if you agree to neoliberal shock therapy. And so neoliberalism turned Russia into an oligarchy. And as I already described, neoliberalism here in the United States, also known as the Reagan Revolution, turned America into an oligarchy. Now, Iraq has flipped into fascism because oligarchy is a transitional state. As I mentioned, it doesn't last typically more than 1 or 2 generations. It's unstable. And typically oligarchy ends in one of 2 ways. Either there's a popular uprising and the nation goes back to being democratic or republican, as the founders would say, it becomes a republic, or it flips into fascism. And Russia is right on the verge of flipping into fascism. It's almost entirely there right now with Putin. And the Republicans, Donald Trump, Steve Bannon's open about this, and Donald Trump and the Republicans in the GOP, particularly people like Rand Paul and Mitch McConnell, they very much want the United States to become fascist. This is the essence of the modern Republican Party. The president of the United States, Joe Biden, has said that these MAGA Republicans are semi-fascists. Yeah. It's just no better description. So both the United States and Russia are at this crisis point right now. Now, in Russia, it's particularly problematic for Putin because fascism, which is what he's trying to install there, or largely has, fascism only survives, and fascist leaders only survive if they're perceived as being super strong and basically, impossible to defeat. Incapable of making mistakes. And here he blew it in Ukraine. I mean, the Ukrainians just recovered 3,000 square kilometers, 1,000 square miles of land just over the last week. And now you've got politicians in Russia saying the unthinkable, including in Moscow, saying what would have been last week, a death sentence, which is Putin, it's time to step down. And whether he's going to step down with a golden parachute, whether there's going to be a revolt, whether there's going to be a new strongman leader who's going to fully turn Russia into a fascist state, or whether the young people of Russia who have connected, on the internet and know how the world works, whether the young people are going to step up and we're going to see a second Gorbachev revolution and see Russia actually become a democratic nation is an unknown right at this moment. Whether Putin will try to start World War III to hang on to power, unknown. And similarly, here in the United States, will Joe Biden succeed in trying to turn America back into a democracy and unwind neoliberalism? Or will the neoliberals, will the fascists now, the Steve Bannon faction of the Republican Party, the Mitch McConnells, the Rick Scotts, the whole bunch of them, will they succeed in turning the United States into a fascist nation? I mean, we're already in a state of oligarchy now, have been for 30 years. Can't get meaningful legislation passed because of that, because of the influence of the rich. And, the next step is either a return to democracy or a step forward into fascism. Which is it going to be here in the United States? I honestly don't know, but all the signs I'm seeing, and if the Democrats can have a blowout election this fall, it's a big one, all the signs I'm seeing are that we're heading back toward democracy, which is a great thing. But it's going to depend on all of us, including you, getting involved.